I used to think my garden was my sanctuary. A peaceful little corner where the birds sang, the breeze felt softer, and everything finally made sense. But one morning, I stood there with a cup of coffee and realized something unsettling. It didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt heavy. Not loud, not messy, just subtly overwhelming, like it was holding on to more than it should. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But the more I looked, the more I saw items tucked under benches, piles behind shrubs, forgotten bags, cracked pots stacked like they were waiting for orders that never came. Somehow, without ever meaning to, I had turned my calm space into something else entirely. Not a garden. A quiet storage yard. And here's the truth, it didn't happen all at once. It happened in small, justifiable ways, like saving something just in case, or promising myself I'd finish a project I barely remembered starting. If this sounds familiar, you're not alone. Have you ever walked outside and felt like something was off, but you couldn't put your finger on it? That subtle sense of unease might not be in your head. It might be hiding right there in plain sight. If your backyard has quietly changed without your permission, hit that like button, subscribe, and stay with me, because the garden I thought I was nurturing was actually holding me back. And what I discovered might change how you see yours. Clutter Trap 1. The Sentimental Tool Graveyard. I didn't notice it at first. These tools weren't scattered around like junk, they were tucked away neatly, leaning against the shed wall or resting beneath the potting table, like old friends waiting quietly to be remembered. There was the garden hoe with a split wooden handle, the one I used to till the flower beds with every spring. A rusted sprinkler head that hadn't spun in years, but once watered the whole lawn like a summer dance. And then, there was my father's old watering can. Green paint peeling, handle slightly bent. He used it every Saturday morning, whistling through his teeth like it was just another instrument in the garden orchestra. I hadn't touched any of these things in years. But I also hadn't been able to let them go. They weren't clutter in the traditional sense. They weren't garbage. They were part of my story. Part of him. And part of who I thought I still needed to be to keep that connection alive. That's where sentimental clutter becomes sneaky. It doesn't yell for attention. It doesn't take up space loudly. It settles into the edges of your world, disguised as memory, disguised as legacy. But the truth hit me one morning as I tried to reorganize a shelf and the old hoe slid down and nearly hit my shin. I caught myself thinking, I should fix this. But I knew I wouldn't. Not because I didn't care, but because I'd moved on. The person I was when I last used that hoe? She was still me, but older, changed, and holding on to too many versions of herself. Letting go felt like betrayal at first. But the deeper betrayal was letting those items slowly decay out of sight, as if the memories they carried didn't deserve better. So I made a new rule: if I'm not going to use it again, and it holds meaning, I honor it differently. I took a photo of my father's watering can. I wrote a little note about the memory it held. And then I let it go. And you know what? I felt lighter. Not like I erased something, but like I made space for a new memory to enter. This wasn't about minimalism. This wasn't about having a Pinterest-perfect garden. It was about removing the quiet weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying. Tools are meant to serve us, not to anchor us to guilt. If you're over 60 and find yourself stepping over old shovels, broken rakes, or watering cans you haven't used in a decade, but can't quite toss, take a pause. Ask yourself, is this helping me grow anything new, or just reminding me of what used to be? There's no shame in keeping a few special items. But keeping all of them might be costing you peace, space, and movement you didn't realize you'd lost. Still holding onto old tools because they belong to someone special? Tell us in the comments. You're not alone, and this journey is more emotional than anyone talks about. Clutter Trap 2. The Empty Planter Parade. I used to love planters, terracotta ones, ceramic ones, even the little plastic ones from the garden center that came free with seedlings. They held so much promise. Every time I bought a new pot, I imagined fresh herbs, a cascade of ivy, maybe marigolds to keep the bugs away. And for a while, I followed through. But eventually, life got busy. Then my knees started acting up. Then I lost track of the planting season one year, and the next, and the next. Now, I didn't stop gardening. I just stopped using all the extras. Yet the planters never left. They lined up like quiet little soldiers along my fence, rows of cracked clay, faded plastic, chipped ceramic. Some were full of dry soil and long-dead roots. Others were stacked, one inside the other, like a promise I kept postponing. And here's the strange part. Every time I walked past them, I felt something. Not inspiration, but pressure. Like I owed them. Like I needed to do something with them, or else I was being wasteful. I didn't realize how subtly they were affecting me until one afternoon I caught myself feeling guilty for sitting down with a glass of iced tea. I looked at those pots and thought, I should really get to those. But I didn't want to. Not out of laziness, but because I wasn't in a season of doing. I was in a season of being. Unused things in our spaces, especially outdoor ones, don't just sit there. They talk. Quietly. They whisper reminders of undone tasks, abandoned plans, or energy we no longer have but don't want to admit we've lost. That's the kind of clutter no one talks about, the kind that doesn't look like mess, but still weighs on your mind. I picked up one planter and saw a spider nest tucked inside. Another had collected rainwater and was breeding mosquitoes. One had cracked completely in the back and couldn't even hold soil anymore. Why was I keeping them? Truth was, I wasn't growing plants anymore. I was growing guilt. So I sorted them. The usable ones I gave away on the local community board. Someone with more time and stronger knees was thrilled to take them. The broken ones went into recycling. And the ones that held sentimental value? I kept just one. A blue ceramic pot where my basil once grew every summer. It now holds a candle near the patio. A quiet nod to the past, without expecting anything from me. And when I cleared the rest, that whole side of the garden felt lighter. Brighter. Not because I planted anything new, but because I released the silent should-haves. If you've got a collection of someday pots staring you down every time you step outside, it might be time to ask, are they helping me dream or making me feel behind? Letting go of the extras isn't giving up. It's giving yourself permission to rest, to reset, and to enjoy the garden you actually have, not the one you feel guilty for not building. And just when I thought I was done with surprises, what I found behind the shed next made my stomach turn. Clutter Trap 3, the recyclables I'll reuse pile. It started with one empty yogurt container. Then a cracked bucket I thought I might patch. Then a stack of plastic nursery trays from the garden center, too flimsy to last, but too useful to throw away. Before I knew it, I had a growing pile in the corner of my yard. And every time I looked at it, I told myself the same thing, I'll reuse those. It felt harmless at first. Practical, even. I grew up in a generation that reused foil, washed out Ziplocs, and turned glass jars into flower vases. We didn't waste things. We found new life in them. That was a good thing, until it quietly turned into clutter. This pile was my future project stash. Things I'd use for seed starters, paint trays, weed barriers, scoopers. I had all kinds of plans for them. But the truth? I wasn't doing any of those things anymore. I bent down one day to pick up a tray, and water splashed out, stagnant, green, and buzzing with mosquito larvae. Another had grown a patch of black mold on the bottom. A third was filled with broken twigs and ant eggs. I stepped back and finally saw it for what it was, not a DIY dream zone, but a collection of plastic waiting to rot in the sun and create health hazards. That hit me hard. Because this wasn't just about clutter. This was about risk. Mosquitoes carrying disease. Mold that aggravated my allergies. Sharp edges that could easily nick thin skin. And yet, I kept walking past it, because deep down, I thought letting go of those items meant admitting defeat. Admitting I wouldn't be building seed trays again. Admitting I no longer had the same energy I once did. But I've learned this, keeping things for a version of yourself that no longer exists doesn't preserve you, it holds you back. So I sorted through that pile like I was digging out old expectations. The clean containers I actually would use, 2 or 3, I washed and put inside. The rest? I tossed or recycled. And that empty space? It gave me something I didn't expect, a breath of fresh air. Because every time I looked at that pile before, it whispered, "You haven't done enough." Now, when I walk past that corner, it says, "You've already done plenty." If you're over 60 and you've got a corner filled with just-in-case recyclables, pause and take a real look. What are you really saving? A project? A plan? Or pressure? Ask yourself this: are these items ready to serve me, or am I still serving them? Do you have a pile of future projects outside too? What's really in it? Share it below, because sometimes just naming it out loud is the first step in letting it go. Clutter Trap 4. Stacked bricks that meant well. They sat neatly behind the shed, 32 concrete bricks, each one stacked with purpose. They weren't garbage. They weren't forgotten. They were waiting. Waiting for the raised bed I promised myself I'd build. I had sketched it out in a notebook. I'd even mapped where the tomatoes would go, where the basil would climb, and how I'd surround it with marigolds to keep the bugs away. That was 7 years ago. Back then, I was still bending easily, still lifting bags of soil without thinking twice. But time has a way of shifting quietly. First it was my shoulder. Then the arthritis in my left wrist. Then the days just got away from me. And the bricks stayed put. At first, they represented a plan. Then, they became a someday. And eventually, they became something else entirely. A silent reminder of the version of me I hadn't realized I was still grieving. Every time I walked past them, I didn't just see bricks. I saw energy I used to have. Goals I didn't finish. A task that felt unfinished in the eyes of anyone who might come by. I wasn't keeping those bricks for the garden anymore. I was keeping them out of guilt. Because letting them go felt like admitting I couldn't follow through. Like I had failed some personal test. But here's the truth no one talks about after 60. Sometimes clutter clings not to our space, but to our identity. It wasn't just the bricks. It was the pressure I put on myself to still be the version of me that bought them in the first place. And that kind of clutter, the one tied to good intentions, to pride, to capability, hurts the most to face. One afternoon, I stood there with a hand on the top brick and just stared. And for once, I didn't feel inspired to lift them. I felt tired. And that's when I knew it was time. I posted them on the neighborhood board. A young couple came by the next day, excited to build their first garden together. And as I watched them load the bricks into their truck, I didn't feel regret. I felt relief. Relief that I no longer had to carry that quiet, invisible expectation. Relief that the bricks would finally serve someone else. Relief that I could stop measuring myself by the projects I hadn't finished. Because letting go of those bricks didn't make me weaker. It made me wiser. If you've been holding onto something heavy, physically or emotionally, because of what it once represented, ask yourself, is it still a goal, or has it become a ghost? Letting go of those bricks hurt. But what I uncovered behind them, the truth I hadn't been ready to face, hit me even harder. Clutter Trap 5. The rotting outdoor furniture. They were just 3 plastic chairs. Lightweight, once white, now sun-faded and tinged with green from years of rain. One had a hairline crack through the seat. Another leaned slightly to the left. And the third, well, it still had the same floral cushion I bought back in 2004. Torn in one corner, flattened by time, and discolored in the middle where countless summers had left their mark. I hadn't sat in any of them in years. Not since the back patio got too hot in the afternoons. Not since the grandkids stopped coming over as often. Not since. I honestly can't even remember when. And yet, I walked past them every day. Sometimes I'd glance at them and think, I should really get rid of those. But I never did. Because they weren't just chairs. They were memories. They held Sunday lunches and iced tea conversations. They reminded me of laughter that drifted into the evening, of birthdays we didn't take enough pictures of, and quiet mornings with a good book and nobody to interrupt. Getting rid of them felt like erasing all of that. But they were falling apart. Wobbly legs. Cracks that pinched your skin if you weren't careful. And yet, I kept them, because in my mind, they still belonged to a life I didn't want to admit had shifted. The thing is, we don't always hold on to furniture because we need it. We hold on to it because it holds a version of us we're not ready to say goodbye to. That's the quiet truth behind certain types of clutter. It doesn't take up much space physically, but it can take up a lot emotionally. I realized one day that I hadn't actually used those chairs in over 5 years. Not once. They sat there like ghosts of habits and routines that no longer existed. So I asked myself the hard question. Am I keeping these because I need them, or because I'm afraid of what their absence might confirm? And that's when I knew it was time. I took one last look, thanked them in my own way, and hauled them out to the curb. They didn't feel like trash. They felt like chapters I'd already lived, and didn't need to reread every day. After they were gone, the patio looked strange at first. Empty, but not in a sad way. In a ready for something new kind of way. If you've got a chair sitting outside that no one has used in years, ask yourself, what are you really sitting with? The furniture, or the feelings tied to it? Sometimes, the act of letting go isn't about making space on the patio. It's about making space in your present. Is there a chair in your yard no one has sat in for years? Tell me in the comments. I promise you're not the only one. Clutter Trap 6. The DIY dreams that died quietly. Tucked behind the side gate was a pile that used to make me feel excited. Bags of potting soil, a roll of chicken wire, a weathered box of paintbrushes, and 3 half-built birdhouses I once started on a cool spring morning. That corner was supposed to become my butterfly garden. I had clipped articles about which flowers would attract monarchs. I even bought a stepping stone kit from a garden show, never opened, still sealed in plastic. But that was 3 summers ago. At the time, I fully believed I'd do it. Not in a wishful kind of way, but in the determined, checklist-making, let's get started kind of way. Then one weekend turned into 2. My hands started aching more than usual. The bag of soil stayed unopened. The chicken wire rusted in the rain. The birdhouses collected spiderwebs. And every time I walked past that pile, something inside me sank. Not because it was messy, but because it reminded me of something I didn't want to admit. I couldn't do it the way I used to. That realization was harder to face than I expected. We talk a lot about embracing our age with grace. But no one warns you how quietly your body starts negotiating behind your back. One year you're climbing a ladder to prune the vines, the next year you're avoiding steps because your knees feel stiff in the morning. And that's where the DIY clutter creeps in. It's not just bags and boxes. It's expectations. It's unfinished plans. It's a version of yourself you haven't updated yet. I felt ashamed to let it go. I worried it meant I was giving up. But after a long conversation with myself, and a much-needed glass of iced tea, I realized something important. I didn't have to abandon the dream. I just needed to resize it. Instead of a full butterfly garden, I chose 3 pots on the porch, each with flowers that butterflies love. Instead of building birdhouses from scratch, I bought a pre-assembled one and painted it gently over 2 mornings. No ladder. No pressure. Just peace. The rest of the supplies? I donated what was still usable. And I tossed what had spoiled. Not out of defeat, but out of respect for the season I'm in now. And the moment I cleared that corner, it no longer whispered unfinished. It felt like space again. Room to breathe. Room for new, lighter plans. If you're holding onto a stack of supplies for a project that just doesn't match your current energy, let me say this clearly, it's okay. You're not giving up. You're evolving. Simplifying a dream doesn't make it smaller. It makes it doable. But the final clutter trap in my garden wasn't something I could even see. And it taught me more than all the others combined. Clutter Trap 7. The path that disappeared. I didn't mean to let it vanish. The path had always been there, a narrow trail of stepping stones that curved through my garden like a gentle invitation. I used to walk it every morning with a cup of tea in hand, breathing in the scent of rosemary, brushing past lavender, stopping to admire whatever bloomed. But over time, life changed its pace. I started watering less often. I sat more than I walked. The vines crept in slowly. The weeds didn't shout, they simply spread. A few branches hung lower each month until I began avoiding that side of the yard altogether. Then one day, I stood at the edge of where the path used to be, and realized I couldn't even see it. The stepping stones were buried under layers of soil and leaves. The edges were lost beneath ferns I hadn't trimmed. And that path, the one that once kept me moving, connected, grounded, was gone. I felt a knot in my stomach. Not just because of the mess, but because of what it symbolized. That path disappearing wasn't just about weeds. It was about me. Somehow, without meaning to, I had stopped walking forward in more ways than one. I'd let my world shrink, one skipped walk, one untrimmed bush, one delayed cleanup at a time. And now my space, the one I designed to bring me peace and movement, had started to close in on itself. That's the thing about clutter, it doesn't always pile up in boxes. Sometimes, it grows wild and unnoticed. And it doesn't just take up space, it takes away possibility. So I rolled up my sleeves, grabbed a pair of gloves, and started digging. At first, I could only clear a small patch. The rest would have to wait. But one stone became 2. Then 3. By the end of the week, the entire path was visible again. Not perfect, not pristine, but alive. I walked it slowly, like reconnecting with an old friend. And I remembered what it felt like to move with intention. That path didn't just lead me through the garden. It led me back to myself. Because when our surroundings close in, we often don't notice until we've already made ourselves smaller to fit them. But the moment we push back, even a little, something opens. Clearing that path didn't just restore my yard. It restored my momentum. And reminded me, I want to keep walking. I want to keep going forward. So if there's a corner of your garden, or your life, that feels forgotten, hidden, or overgrown, take a closer look. There may be a path under there, waiting to carry you somewhere again. Start small. Start gentle. But whatever you do, don't stop walking. I didn't declutter my garden to make it look pretty for someone else. I didn't do it to be more organized or impress the neighbors. I did it because somewhere along the way, my garden stopped reflecting who I am now, and started echoing versions of me I hadn't realized I'd outgrown. And for a long time, I didn't even notice. Everything had a reason for staying. The tools belonged to memories. The planters carried possibility. The old chairs whispered of quiet afternoons. The bricks, the wire, the birdhouses, they were all tied to dreams I once held tight. But little by little, they became obstacles instead of opportunities. And I found myself walking around them, avoiding corners of my own space, until it felt like I was tiptoeing through my past instead of living in my present. That's when I realized something hard and beautiful at the same time. I wasn't losing pieces of myself by letting go. I was giving those pieces room to breathe. Decluttering wasn't about throwing things away. It was about freeing up the space to appreciate what still matters, what still brings me life, peace, and purpose. Now when I step outside, I don't see pressure. I see clarity. A clean bench under the shade tree where I sit with my morning coffee. A tidy little tomato bed I can actually maintain. And a quiet path where I walk with my granddaughter, hand in hand, showing her the lavender and the bees and how good it feels just to be outside together. I didn't lose my garden. I reclaimed it. And in doing so, I reclaimed something in myself too. The freedom to change. The right to release. The peace that comes from knowing that your space should grow with you, not hold you hostage to what once was. So if even one of these clutter traps lives in your garden, I want you to know you're not alone. And you don't have to clear it all in one day. But now you see it. And that awareness? That's where the real change begins. Start with the corner that weighs on you the most. The thing you walk past but never touch. The item that whispers, someday, when you know in your heart that day has passed. Clear it, not because you're giving up on your past, but because you're making room for your now. If this felt personal, if this reminded you of a corner you've been avoiding, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who's ready to feel lighter in their own backyard. And subscribe to Wise Aging Seniors. Because we're not done growing yet. Not in our gardens. And not in our lives.